You start a conversation, you bring everyone in the room, you open them up to being vulnerable, but you're not actually equipping them on how to have those conversations or giving them a roadmap to know what happens next. People
Mm-hmm.
could leave disheartened. They could leave feeling that honestly it's a waste of their time. A few
Mm-hmm.
people may feel affirmed. There is good that comes out of it when you do it that way, but it really comes down to supporting the leader to keep the work ongoing, even in the absence of an external professional who comes in.
So welcome to this week's episode of Leadership Soundbites with my very special guest, Dr. Angela Birts, founder, CEO of, I have to read this now, I'm sorry, Birts Equity and Inclusion Solutions, even though I just heard it and wrote it down. Angela and I met through SBA, so Small Business Administration, the Thrive program, because you were one of the business owners that had signed up and got brought into the program. And so this was last year, because I think we ended in 2024, didn't we? Had our graduation in December of 24.
Yes.
Super cool. It's cool that we're able to touch base and continue on because I love the space that you're in and the work that you're doing.
Thank you, Michelle.
And so I know you have a quote to kick us off with, and then we'll unpack some of the topics that we have because they're super freaking relevant. So thank you.
Yes. Thank you for having me, Michelle. I
Oh,
appreciate
yeah.
the opportunity and also to connect with you too. So the quote that I have, it's actually a scripture that comes from Ephesians 2:10, and it is, for we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works God prepared in advance for us to do.
Mhm. Well,
Yeah.
so thank you. And I know before we hit record, you talked a little bit about that because you're in the DEI space, DEIB
I,
space, right? And that's what your business is. You've been doing it for a number of years. And with the administration that's here and the changes that are going on, like I shared with you before, it feels like baby in bathwater, right? Because
I,
there is some not so great initiatives that were going on underneath this umbrella of really great work that everything's got thrown out. And so that means something to you, what you just shared the scripture in this time that you're navigating through. So can you say just a little bit more about that? Because I found that interesting because I think it's important for all of us, especially people that are self-employed. In fact, I say that it's going to be self-employed because it's going to be people that are working for other people too, because I'm on
absolutely.
phone calls with people that have been laid off that they didn't expect to be laid off. So I think it's all that stuff of being able to navigate what's happening. So what is it for you?
Absolutely. So I connect with the scripture on a personal level and a personal and professional level. And it reaffirms my purpose of why I chose to move in this particular direction, not only as an entrepreneur, but as a leader.
Hmm.
And since I was younger, I've always been the type of individual that wanted to bring people together.
Mm.
I was so privileged to grow up in the city of East Palo Alto, a small town that was culturally diverse and incredibly rich in terms of experiences, language, backgrounds, and so much exposure that I gained being young.
Hmm.
And I appreciate that. I appreciate that cross-cultural exchange that I encountered when I was younger, and that's
Hmm.
followed me into adulthood. And also, what comes with that are these varying beliefs that people have,
Hmm.
lived experiences. And when you bring people together, even with the best intentions, there are going to be barriers, but those barriers should never hinder us or just people from impacting change. So
Hmm.
that's why I got into this particular work. And now it's even more important to continue to define why it is that I do what I do. And it is challenging because the
Hmm.
work that I do is under scrutiny at the moment. But when
Yeah.
I think about that scripture and I reflect on the fact that I've been prepared to do this work, I hearken it back to what I experienced in the past. That was actually very more asset based for me in terms of a learner, a student, a person, a professional. And I think it's possible to still even to have connections and foster those positive relationships with people, as difficult as it is right now.
Yeah. I have to wonder, it's interesting because I think back to my childhood and growing up,
Hmm.
I had diversity. I didn't label it that way.
Right.
It was just how we grew up. I didn't see color distinctions. We were all humans, right? And we all had differences. Maybe I had brown hair, someone else had blonde hair, someone else had darker skin, but there wasn't anything. Does that make sense? So I think for me, it was really shocking when I got exposed to
I
the
see.
areas that people needed to be more intentional around this stuff because they weren't necessarily accepting of differences that somebody else had and open to hearing the differences. I feel so strongly and I've been in teams this way, that when we embrace the diversity that we all have of thought, of opinion, of all the stuff, what the product that we deliver, the thinking that we do, the stuff that we do is so much better than what it was in just our siloed thinking, even though it's painful at times to navigate through because someone is challenging your current thinking or the way you might think. But it's, if we can just be open to it. When you were growing up, like you said, as an adult, you speak on it to go, I was so fortunate to raise it. Did you recognize that as diversity when you were a kid?
That's such a great question. I never labeled it that way.
Yeah, that's what
But
I
I
thought.
will say, as a young Black girl living in America, which is highly racialized, I did see colors. I
Yeah.
did see difference. I recognize that. And I was also in an environment where there was a bit of curiosity about that and candid conversations around why does a person look that way?
Yeah.
For a young child, when you're being socialized and you're growing up, if you see difference, you are going to be curious about that. And
Hmm.
I think it's really important to be in an environment with trusted adults and parents to help you navigate those thoughts
Hmm.
that you're having and help you develop the appropriate language to befriend someone that may look different. But
Yeah.
acknowledging that there's a difference there isn't necessarily a bad thing. And that is pretty much what comes up a lot for many people. But I could speak for myself as being a young child of color. I am inculcated with race and
Hmm.
discussing race and noticing that I'm Black and having pride that I'm Black. And similarly,
Hmm.
other people grow up that way as well. But again, it's not necessarily a barrier until it does become a
Hmm.
blockage towards connecting
Yeah.
with people.
Yeah, my grandkids are, I just think about the youngest one's 5, the other one's 8, the younger, and they're raised similarly to where I was, right? That you accept the human as the human, right? And so it's interesting, and maybe it's California versus other areas, I don't know. But it's interesting for me when there are opportunities, though, for us to come together and have more intentional conversations and learn skills,
Right.
be able to engage with other people. And I think that's a bulk of the work that you're doing when you're working with
Yeah.
organizations, right? Um, what if you can share just a little bit about what you do? What does an engagement look like, right? And then the other thing that came to mind, I don't recommend anyone layers questions like this, but this is stuff in my brain,
Okay.
is what is one of the things, Angela, that you're like the most proud of when you walked away and you're like, oh my God, this is something that they didn't think it could be done. And it was done. We did it.
I'm going to come back to that. Okay,
Okay.
to that question. So, what is it that I do? I consider myself to be a thought partner and coach. And I'm
Uh-huh.
very mindful that coaching is a completely specific industry, right? So, when I use that word, I want to be clear of how I leverage that as a business owner. And pretty much what it is creating a safe space for leaders to discuss what they're grappling with within their organizations when it comes to the climate of their organizations and then when it comes to the bandwidth of their teams and people
Mm-hmm.
accomplishing their goals. So I am that person for my clients that they could talk to, but I'm also the person to hold them accountable in a way that is going to be conducive to making things better. Because we know this is how I work with power dynamics, right? Even me as a leader, I'm mindful with the best intentions. If you're not getting feedback on how people are receiving you, you could have your blinders on, or
Mm-hmm.
you may recognize it, but don't do anything about it. And it could truly undermine the capabilities of people who have the best intentions to do their work well. So, in working with leaders and having those conversations, it's my way of saying one of the first things that has to be acknowledged in this work of DEI or trying to impact any type of culture is
Mm-hmm.
who you are and what's your position in life. So let's have the conversation about identity. What does it mean to be a man in a leadership role? What does it mean
Mm-hmm.
to be a woman? These things shouldn't have such an impact, but we live in a society where gender and race, they do play a factor in how
Mhm.
people are perceived. And so unpack that, because people, if they're following you or working under your leadership, they want you to be able to speak candidly about that, including your position and your leadership role and how you make decisions. And I think that in my role, that's one of the first steps that I take. So there are so many different type of approaches in my industry. It could be, Michelle, you call me and you say, you know what, Angela, I need someone, I know someone who needs you to come in and do implicit
Mhm.
bias training, or they want you to talk about systemic oppression or whatever that training may be. To a certain extent, it may be helpful. It may feel good for people to have those conversations and create that space. But I actually know it's so much more than that. It's about
Mhm.
cultivating trust with any type of person where I'm coming in as an external consultant. And it's also helping them create a plan to implement those type of conversations. So
Mhm.
where people feel supported. Because if you start a conversation, you bring everyone in the room, you open them up to being vulnerable, and but you're not actually equipping them on how to have those conversations or giving them a roadmap to know what happens next. People
Mhm.
could leave disheartened. They could leave feeling that honestly it's a waste of their time. A few
Mhm.
people may feel affirmed. There is good that comes out of it when you do it that way, but it really comes down to supporting the leader to keep the work ongoing, even in the absence of an external professional who comes in. So that's my mindset. So there's
Mhm.
like some umbrella work that happens under that. Like it could be that I do what's called a needs assessment, where
Mhm.
I go in. I actually really enjoy this, the work that
Yeah, I'm sure
you
you do.
mentioned.
Yeah, because there's
And
interviews
I'm an
involved.
investigator. I'm an
Yeah.
investigator. I set up shop, and usually I have a designated office or space within the organization. There's all this pre-work that happens, like an announcement of why these interviews are going to take place,
Mhm.
co-creating those research questions with leadership teams. But
Mhm.
ultimately, I create a safe space where I interview people around decision making. Do they feel valued, respected, and seen? If they were to do anything to make the environment better, what would that one change be? And it really uncovers from every level of the organization some opportunities for growth. And
Mhm.
I always think from an asset perspective, what's working well and how do you
Mhm.
leverage what's working well?
Mhm.
And then I curate all of those findings and I write an executive summary on what those challenges and opportunities are and recommendations on how companies should move forward. I
Mhm.
will say that's the most comprehensive approach that I take. And it is
Mhm.
actually my preference because I've seen the impact of what happens after that wonderful work is done. Then it takes on a new meaning when people are
Mhm.
being called in for a training.
Well, it's interesting because it's going to take on meaning because their voices have been heard. And
Yeah,
when you give people a platform for their voices to be heard, it doesn't feel like top down.
that's
Right.
right.
So even if the training is the same training that you would do in another organization they didn't do the prep work on, you're able to weave in some of those examples, those that you heard from the interview.
Yes, that's right.
So then all of a sudden now people are like, they were listening, they did pay attention, they did whatever. And I think that's one of the biggest things is as humans, we want to feel heard. We want to
Yes,
feel valued. And it doesn't, to your point, it doesn't necessarily take an external consultant to do that.
that's right.
It does, though, if leadership doesn't even know where to start.
That's a great point. And the other thing is, it also creates an opportunity for leadership to discuss how they're feeling
Yeah.
and how they are as leaders. No one's perfect, right? So even that opportunity is extended to someone that's in a managerial supervisor
Mhm.
role who too would like to express how things are going or where they feel things can improve. So
Yeah.
I absolutely take that approach and tremendously stand behind
Yeah.
opportunities for needs assessments within organizations. It does require resources, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Time, commitment, funding,
Hmm.
but I found that people truly leverage that opportunity to express how they're feeling and understand that they won't be judged or penalized because the anonymity component of it is what's really useful for
Yeah.
people.
I have to wonder
Mhm.
when you get tapped to do stuff. I can't, I'm playing the scenarios in my head and I wonder, it's like, okay, people aren't sure, or they're trying to check a box and get DEI training, at a point before the administration changed and all that, versus people understanding, because you and I've had this conversation within the SBA, and I've got, another client that does DEI work. It's like you and I talked about, you need to be able to describe what you do
That's right.
that's not using these highly charged terms. And what you do is culture work. It's
It
about
is culture.
team building. It's all that stuff. And so it almost feels like the DEI part of it, or the DEIB part of it, is almost like that's the solution, if you will, to why
Mhm.
the culture is the way it is.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, it's about shifting the culture.
That's exactly what it's about. And one way to look at DEIA, DEIB, because we know
Yeah,
the belonging takes
yeah,
on meaning in the accessibility
yeah.
component, it is a framework. And we use frameworks all the time. But it just so happened that this particular framework is under a microscope at the moment.
Yeah.
But that is literally what it is. To implement change, you think about policies and procedures. You think about the community engagement piece, and to where you were, the direction you were going in of people that would tap and reach out to me. There are different reasons why people will make that
Hmm.
decision. And often it could be in response to what's going on in society. In
Hmm.
2022, when there was so much civil unrest due to, the killings of unarmed
Yeah.
Black males, and there was almost like this woke movement where people
Hmm.
saw the necessity of bringing in someone to do implicit bias training.
Hmm.
There was a heightened interest in having people come in and do that.
Hmm.
Yet there have been people for the past 20 years that have devoted resources to working on multiculturalism,
Yeah.
diversity, or whatever they call it. And those people still exist, and they too stick around. So that
Hmm.
could be a motivating factor there. As a part of a consultation, I'm able to, ascertain early on where that motivation is coming from.
Hmm.
And I could also determine the level of commitment in the conversations and
Hmm.
the engagement that I have, whether via email or the initial communication contact, of
Yeah.
whether or not it could be a good fit.
Yeah. No, that's a good call out. So what's a proud moment for you?
I have so many proud moments, but the
Okay.
one that comes to mind is centered around education because my
Okay.
background is in education. I have a doctorate in education leadership, a master's in education, and I worked in schools. In
Hmm.
fact, my work as a diversity expert, if that's what you want to call it, it
Yeah.
truly started while being in an independent private school. I was a director of diversity and inclusion for 6 years, where I was
Okay.
responsible for educating the board on topics of DEI, recruitment and retention of staff of color,
Yeah.
faculty of color, and so forth. So when I say it truly takes change and time to shift culture, it does. I was in that
Hmm.
position for 6 years. So a proud moment is not in that particular role. It's in my role as a consultant in a business.
Yeah.
I had an opportunity, I believe it started in 2019. I
Okay.
worked with the County Office of Education in Santa Clara, and
Yeah.
they were responding to achievement gaps in learning for
Mm.
students within that region. And particularly, they found in doing research through a grant that they received through the California Department of Education that there were some groups of students that were essentially not having the necessary resources and pathways to be successful.
Oh.
Those groups of students consisted of English language learners,
Hmm.
students with disabilities, and African American students. So if you
Mm.
think of a school system and you think of education, with public education in particular, we serve everyone. But the
Hmm.
fact that those groups had disproportionately higher rates and expulsion and suspicion from school,
Hmm.
lower achievement in English language arts and mathematics, chronic absenteeism. There
Hmm.
was an opportunity there to start to address where those issues were stemming from and create some strategies on how to support students. So I was a part of an initiative called the Ways to Equity Playbook, where for
Mm.
several years I conducted research. I was able to be a part of a team with other consultants and other educators focused on equity to really buckle down and think about what would it take to shift things for these students. And so we created a playbook, and I
Hmm.
wrote several chapters in that playbook, and I offered evidence-based research on how to see some improvement in those particular areas. And
Mm-hmm.
from there, there were opportunities to further the work to focus on specific groups like African American students. And
Mm-hmm.
I co-authored and also wrote some other enhancements to that. So I'm very proud of that. And I could go back and look at that publication, but I actually still use it with my clients who are in education because the information is incredibly valuable. And there are many ways to address these topics, and writing is a powerful tool to address
Yeah.
systemic.
So what were the results? Because when I think about that stuff, when you were talking about those particular groups, what was going on? I mean, you talk about expulsions in school and late, missing and all the stuff. That's not a school thing per se. I mean, the schools may be able to adjust it, but there's a lot more going on
You're
uh,
absolutely
with
right.
those populations. So I'm thinking there's partnerships involved so that you can understand what other support is in the communities for these at-risk, people in the communities. Because there's just so many other things. I mean, I could take it on the other end of it where you're talking about inmates. I had someone who's working with inmates and he talks about here are the populations of the percentage of people in this, demographic that end up, as inmates in prison. So, I mean, there's so many connections here. And what comes to mind for me is if you start to solve it at that younger age,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden it doesn't balloon up to become the rest of it.
Yeah, so there's this concept called targeted universalism. And it
Okay.
pretty much says that when you define these strategies based on distinct groups, that you're actually creating opportunities and blueprints to then take some of those strategies and employ them in serving all communities. So I bring that up because this is very much connected to the DEI.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's an assumption that everyone's on the same page. Some people
Mm,
hold the ideology like meritocracy, right? You pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. Those aren't my children.
mm-mm.
Like, why should I care? It's sad to say that, but some people
Yeah.
do carry that mentality. Then you have other people who carry the mentality is it's other people's children, but I'm a member of this society as a human
Mm-hmm.
being. I do care about the welfare of others. So
Mm-hmm.
keeping that in mind, when I brought up the target universalism, that's a framework and a
Mm-hmm.
strategy within itself to walk into a room with people to bring them on board a why an intervention or something is necessary for a
Mm-hmm.
subgroup that in the state of California, for certain racial ethnic groups, we're literally talking about comprised of 2% of the student body population.
Mm-hmm.
To put it into perspective. And
Yeah.
some people think in terms of numbers, they think in terms of quantitative and so forth, and it's humanizing the data to say,
Mm-hmm.
we are trying to support students. And you're absolutely right. Everyone plays a role in that. And so
Mm-hmm.
even targeting those interventions and those supports, the conversation could be specific to teachers.
Mm-hmm.
One area connected to that, the teacher cannot solve every problem that's in the life of
Mm-mm.
the student. But a
No.
teacher can create an environment where a student feels affirmed when they walk in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And one approach that's evidence-based, that's highly researched, that I use even as a lecturer at UC Santa Cruz, is around culturally relevant pedagogy. That you can bring in literature or examples from the real world that reflects the cultures and the diversities of students in your classroom so that they're
Mm-hmm.
able to make that connection. And it is possible to do that and still create an environment where students are achieving at a high level. And there's so many, and it could be subtle. Like I've used some examples in training. I could give you one. We're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the young students, so I get excited and giddy having this conversation.
No, I think it's
Educator,
great.
it could be, I mean, I've seen so many incredible examples, depending on where you're situated in the States. Let's say you're in a colder climate like the Midwest or
Mm-hmm.
so forth and you are teaching in a class on science, the examples that you would bring into the classroom in a place where it's colder may be how do you start a fire,
Mm.
stay warm. That may not work well for a child in California, where the climate isn't incredibly cold.
Well, and the wildfire's going on. We
Right,
don't
and
want
the wildfires are going
yeah,
on,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
that may not be the example that you draw from. It may be how do you, what does sunscreen do to your skin, and why
yeah.
is it important to put that on when you walk outside what are the assumptions behind that based on race and differences? So it could start off as science, and then suddenly you're talking about it through culture, and that creates such a rich conversation on beliefs of whoever uses sunscreen. It seems really subtle, but for a child, they're brought into that. Like that is a real tangible example that you can educate and teach them.
Well, and then what you're talking
Yeah.
about too, Angela, is
Mhm.
we're not separating them out.
No.
Going, okay, now we're going to do science, and then we're going to go on
Right.
DEI and diversity, and and then we're going to go over here. When we integrate all the thinking and the awareness and all the stuff at the time, it it it's how we live life.
Exactly.
And so when we do that, then we're not all of a sudden going from room to room to room. We're
Mhm.
going, okay, this is my whole house. And it's just part of the thinking and the awareness. And, and then people are able to have curiosity, right? Because, like, if you don't grow up with African American, Black people, or
Mhm.
people from Cuba or Hawaii or whatever in your home, you may have some assumptions. I have a very dear friend of mine that her husband's from Ghana. He's very
Okay.
dark skinned. So people may have this assumption, well, you don't need to worry about it. You don't sunburn. I'm light skinned. I'm Irish. And it's like, no.
Right.
So
And
it's
then,
it's
yeah.
an interesting thing to be able to get questions asked in a safe environment, even ones that you never even thought you had.
Right. And imagine bringing in a dermatologist to give
Yes.
your explanation, and they will tell you that everyone would benefit from being protected, especially as a season shift and so forth. Right. And the other thing that I was thinking about connected to that, there are some activities to create that space, even within trainings and team building. And one of them, it seems so simple, but in advance, you give people the assignment in preparation for us meeting together, bring in an artifact from your home that reflects your identity or your culture.
Mm,
And people could go in so many directions. They may bring a
yeah.
photo with their loved ones, or they show their family or the people that are important to them. They may bring in a quilt. They may bring something that they eat. And it on the surface, it seems that, oh, it's so simple, but it really is a story behind that. So I say that to say also we should never lose foresight of the power of storytelling and connecting with people because everyone has a story. Everyone has
Uh,
a particular
well,
story.
and I think what you're calling out, and it's about getting beneath the surface.
The
Uh,
iceberg.
yeah,
Yes.
because what happens is we experience people in the environment that we meet them, right? So let's just
Right.
say the work setting or the school setting. And there is so much more to that person beyond the environment that we experience them in. And there's so much research around this that when we start to get to know people, I think about Kyle Ferrazzi's book, Never Lead Alone, right? When we start to experience people as the rest of the story that they
Right.
are, we have deeper connections. We have I mean, work is better. I mean, all of it's better. And I think that's what you're describing here is when we're bringing something, hey, that represents you, we're sharing a part of who we are outside of the environment that we met each other.
Absolutely. And also recognizing that that still might not feel safe for some people,
Hmm.
depending on what environment they're in, because you do have to negotiate who you can trust and who you
Hmm.
can be vulnerable with. And if there's any incident, and this is a whole different topic around like a microaggression or feeling slighted or not feeling heard, you're going to be reluctant to share aspects of who you are in a space that doesn't quite feel safe or conducive to your well-being. So I also want to acknowledge that too. But where I see the benefit in the work that I do is helping people support and shift the culture to where the space
Hmm.
can become that for others. Because when it becomes that, you bring out a lot in people, but
Hmm.
also it could become a gratifying experience for them as well.
Hmm.
Just walking around guarded, it's hard to be guarded all the time,
Hmm.
but I understand professionally how it could become that way for people to have to protect themselves. But it doesn't
Hmm.
mean it's having a positive impact on the body, psychologically, physically, emotionally.
It's
So
exhausting.
forth. It's exhausting.
It's exhausting to walk around like that. And it's interesting, the thing that came to mind for me when you were talking about creating the space so people feel safe sharing that kind of stuff. Not every leader has the developed skill set to
You're
be able to
right.
navigate those conversations and because it's going to be important depending on how far off the
Mhm.
culture is from accepting, not fear-based, all the stuff, right? That I don't know that I would encourage someone who doesn't have skills to dive right in
I
and
agree
start
with
that
you.
conversation. I think it's important to have, depending on how far off the
Mhm.
culture is, to have it facilitated so someone else can be watching and navigating through that stuff and that sharing because depending on how it is, it can go sideways in a
You're
nanosecond.
absolutely right. There's
Yeah.
many examples where people walk away from a training or this space to connect and build community and feel wounded or worse
Yeah.
than what they did
Yeah.
before they
Yeah.
entered the room if it's not organized and handled with care and through the expertise of someone who's capable of leading that well and supporting the leader and also being a co-facilitator, even if it is on the sidelines,
Yeah.
it can have a unfortunately negative impact.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I encourage people, yeah, step into it. If for some reason you know that there's opportunity in your organization, and depending on where you're at and ideally where you could be at, it would be good to reach out and get some facilitation because the leader is part of that team that is going to be going through that work. And so the more you can be part of the team and not have to play dual roles,
That's right.
the better the outcome's going to be. Because I've had some leaders I've worked with that they're like, oh, no, the leaders are just going to observe. And I'm like, no. The leaders are part of the team. They're all going to be part of the discussion too, because
Yes.
otherwise then you get this false, hey, and the message can be for the people, oh, you're too good for this. It's
Mhm.
like, no, we're all part of it and we're learning together. So I
Have
think
to model it.
that's my caution with that. It's like if depending on how far off you are, be careful about how you dive in. It's still very valuable stuff to do. And it's almost like spring cleaning where you stop halfway through and you're worse than when you started. So just be
Mhm.
cognizant of that, I think is my thing to say. Yeah.
I agree.
Um, I appreciate this time
Me
and
too, Michelle. Me too.
topic. Yeah, it's so good to catch up with you
Yeah.
again. I know we had a chance, I think it was last month, to
Mhm.
connect in person, so it was cool to see you. And I know you took a social media picture. Did you actually use it?
So I have someone that's working on it.
Yeah, okay.
Though it's
Okay.
past, it's meant to be like a scrapbook. So like
Okay.
there were some they're being worked on now.
I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. So is this one for you? You could scrapbook this.
You're right, I can. How does that work?
Yeah,
I just take it from your page or you send it to me?
you can. Yeah, I can send it to you. I'm gonna
Okay,
tag you anyway, but yeah, there you go. You
perfect.
can add to your scrapbook.
Yay, thank you.
I wonder, there's a way people are like, oh, Michelle, you could just do whatever. Let me see. I think I just printed screen. So hold on, let me do it again.
Okay,
Here we go. We're doing it live. We're printing screen. Smile. Okay. So
okay,
we'll see if it takes. I don't know where it
okay,
went, but we'll look for it.
okay.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
this time. So
Me
what are
too.
one or two things on all the stuff we've chatted about that you'd love people to walk away with?
Number one, the importance of being an active listener.
Hmm.
There's so much going on, but when a person is creating that opportunity to connect and talk, just try to listen and hear them. And I know that could be painful depending on who you're talking to, but still being an active listener, because just as much as, you could feel that you want to be heard, others do want to be heard as well. And then also it's connected to like the idea of culture and culture competence is understanding the difference between intention and the impact that
Mm,
goals or tasks could have. And knowing that like where it could come into conflict, there are ways to still become better and grow past mistakes.
yeah. I agree. It's never too late. I think
Mhm.
that's the message, never too late. The active listening part, it was so funny when you were saying it, is what popped in my head is that people feel rushed a lot, right?
Yeah.
And so as leaders, what I'll say to that is when you're encouraging people to come to you and talk and share things and everything, let people know if you've got a time constraint.
I like that.
Because what happens a lot of times is, and I'll give you a scenario, is the leaders going from thing to thing, or they're in between meetings, because we end up getting booked back to back virtually now because you don't have to walk from office to office.
Right.
But someone will tap you and go da 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 da, and you're sitting there listening, but you're really not listening because your brain is on the next thing that you're going to go do, that you have to be there in a minute. I'm just making stuff up. Tell people. When people reach out because you solicited and want them to reach out to you, and you
Yes.
literally only have a minute or two before the next meeting, tell them, hey, I've only got a couple minutes. If can it be done within that time? If not, I want to talk to you. I want to hear from you. And let's schedule some time to meet.
I agree.
But otherwise, what I've seen people do is they start logging on to the other thing, or they're in their head going, I've got to get out of here. They're going to shut up, da, 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 da. And then you're no longer listening to the human in front of you. You're listening to the narrative in your head and you're rushing to the thing. People know, even if they don't know what you're thinking, they know that you're not paying attention.
I had that experience this week.
Yeah.
I was on the receiving end of that, and it was actually a very important meeting. And I was really taken aback by that.
Yeah. So tell people.
Mm-hmm.
When you're conflicted and stuff doesn't work anymore, and for me, my advice I'll give myself, because it's important to get better at it, is when we schedule meetings to check in with somebody, say, hey, does this time still work for you?
Yes, yes.
I don't do that like with regularity, but
Okay.
us talking, I think it's a good check-in with stuff like that. And then if you're on the receiving end of you sense that someone's not paying attention, to say, hey, does this time not work for you?
That's
You can
right.
schedule a different time. Be comfortable with saying that, because stuff comes up in
Mm-hmm.
this crazy world that we're in. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for
Thank
this.
you, Michelle.
And so until next time, this has been
Yeah.
Leadership Soundbites with Angela and Michelle. And please like, share, subscribe, and have a freaking awesome day. Thank
You
you.
too. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.